Well, welcome everybody. We're almost on time. A little tech snafu at the beginning, but it looks like we're going to make it on time. My name's Steve COVELL. I'm the chair of the Department of Comparative Religion, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you all here today to celebrate Dr. Siebert's work and this conference on the critical theory of religion in his honor. Thank you for coming, and thank you to the weather for holding out. I was worried. We have people driving down. We have students driving down from Traverse City. We've had people coming from all over. I really appreciate the trip everybody's made to be here to listen to these papers and to celebrate the work of Dr. Siebert. I'll be the one holding up the sign telling our presenters to please stop your overtime. I'll have a little 5-minute card or whatever. I'll let you know. We're just going to go through each of the presentations. There'll be short breaks between each one of them as we fight with the technology. And then we'll have a little break in the middle, and then we'll finish up with about a half hour or so for discussion when it wraps up. Without further ado, I'd like to get this ball rolling here and introduce Dr. Jennifer Bott, the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs at WMU, who will say a few words to get us going here.
Thank you, and thank you all so much for allowing me to join you. I was so honored to be asked to welcome you to our campus this morning for all the reasons a provost is: scholarship, discussion, advancement of knowledge. But there's another reason I was really excited. I've been at Western now for a year and a half, and I had not yet met Rudy Siebert. But I heard his name again and again and again in all kinds of places where you hear about excellence. And so I had a bit of a fangirl moment this morning because I finally got to meet the gentleman that I had heard so much about. And so I'm honored to be here simply to know you and to celebrate the impact that you've had on an entire field of study, to celebrate that impact alongside your family who are here today to celebrate the incredible courage that you've had across a lifetime to advance a field of knowledge while advancing yourself and creating such a legacy. And so I'm grateful to be part of this moment because this moment is really about what Western Michigan is about. It's about discovery, it's about a lifetime of service, and it's about impact. And so when I had the opportunity to read Rudy's bio, and I can't even, productivity doesn't begin to describe your career. You know, I think about, I had the opportunity as provost to sit over the first promotion and tenure process this year. And so I see people who have done incredible things to receive full professor. And then I'm reading about Rudy, and am I correct? 11 books since 2010. Yeah. That's more than a book a year, right? I am a statistician, so I'm pretty decent at math. But it's amazing, the commitment that you've had to this field of study and those that you have inspired to join you in this work. And so for the 54 years you were with us at Western Michigan, for all of the folks that you inspired, impacted, taught alongside, I say thank you. And I am grateful that all of you are here to celebrate this extraordinary career. And I'm even more excited at the impact that it will have forever. And so thank you for allowing me to be here this morning, to meet many of you, and to celebrate. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Dustin Byrd from OLIVET College.
In my younger years, I was actually a jazz musician. I studied jazz here, and so I used to improvise a lot more than I do now. So first, I'd like to thank Provost, Dr. Jennifer Bott, there for coming and recognizing the wonderful work of the Comparative Religion Department and the lifelong work of Dr. Rudy Siebert, Dr. COVELL for putting in so many hours and so much work in getting this going. He worked tirelessly to get this. Lori Deal as well, who also did a lot of the heavy lifting to get it going. The faculty and emeritus faculty who are here from the Comparative Religion Department, who have worked with Rudy for so many years and have suffered his continuous critique of all things pertaining to religion. I'd also like to thank the family of Rudy for lending us their dad, their grandfather, and their great-grandfather. The balance of academic and private life isn't always easy, especially when those lines blur as often as they do with Rudy. who takes care of his students as if they were extended family. I'd like to thank the former students of Rudy who are here as well, both the formal students as well as the informal students, many of which are here, and many of you came from long distances. We all know just how much we owe him for our own personal, theoretical, and academic growth. Yet somehow I think many of us still underestimate how much influence Rudy has had on not only our work, but also our outlook on life. Of the former students, I would like to thank Dr. Mike Ott and his wife Mary Louise. After Rudy, Mike is the most accomplished critical theorist of religion. His conversations and discourses with Rudy and I have advanced the theory greatly. Horkheimer once said that his philosophy was indistinguishable from Adorno's. I can only hope that I come close to sharing that kind of philosophical symbiosis with Mike in his work as well. Lastly, I'd like to thank Dr. Siebert himself. Without Rudy and his critical theory of religion and society, born of the critical theory of the Frankfurt School, none of this would be possible. I'm going to tell you a few things that you probably know about Rudy, but some of you might not know these things. This is going to be interesting. Since 1965, when he came to WMU, his 54 years of teaching means that he has taught tens of thousands of students over the course of 4 generations, the baby boomers, Gen X, the millennials, and now the iGen. He has worked under 7 of WMU's 9 total presidents. Dr. Miller, Dr. Bernhardt, Dr. Henneke, Dr. Floyd, Dr. Bailey, Dr. Dunn, and now Dr. Montgomery. In the course of these years, he's published dozens of books, hundreds of articles, and book chapters. For over 40 years, he has traveled to Europe, first to Dubrovnik, Croatia, while it was still Yugoslavia, and second to Yalta, Crimea, while it was still the Ukraine, to direct 2 international conferences, The Future of Religion and Religion in Civil Society, bringing academics together from Canada, America, Western and Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. And here's something to consider. Rudy began teaching at WMU when Lyndon Baines Johnson was the president. Since then, he has witnessed and discussed with his students, you can imagine, that's critical theory and engagement with all these things coming here. The Vietnam War, the My Lai massacre, Watergate, and the impeachment of President Nixon, the pardon of President Nixon, the Iranian Revolution, the Iran-Contra affair, Reagan's war on the liberation movements in Latin America, the fall of the Berlin Wall, which was constructed just a couple years before he came, in 1961. He witnessed the collapse of the Soviet Union, the end of apartheid in South Africa, the Persian Gulf War, the Yugoslavian Civil War, which he continued to travel to despite the war, offering medicine to anyone who asked for it. He witnessed the impeachment of Bill Clinton, the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center, the burning of the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas, September 11th, I was there for that one, the war in Afghanistan, the war on Iraq, right, that's the proper language, which, for the record, there was no WMD. We discussed that before the war happened, there's no WMD, it was right. The election of the first black president, the election of the first orange president, which was in response to the election of the first black president, and retired just before the impeachment hearings of that president. So, again, something to consider. Dr. Siebert came to WMU when Pope Paul VI sat on the throne of St. Peter. From there, he taught about Pope John Paul I, at least for 1 month. Not papal historians here. He was only Pope for 1 month. Right. He taught about Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI, his fellow German, and now Pope Francis I. Just before coming to WMU, he saw the adoption of the Vatican II reforms and then watched as they were systematically undermined by conservative forces in the church. He watched, taught about, and theorized with the liberation theologians as they attempted to liberate Catholicism from its ruling class entanglements, delivering the emancipatory nature and prophetic religion to the victims of history. Of these and many other topics, he lectured in the US, Canada, Europe, and even Japan. But always, he brought his deeply penetrating insights to the working class students of WMU, as well as the city of Kalamazoo, in an attempt to enlighten West Michigan, which is not an easy task. Now, a little personal bio. As for me, when I first came to WMU in 1994, I came as a music major, intending on minoring in comparative religion. When I was young, I wanted to be a priest, which scared my Dutch Reformed mother when I told her so at 9 years of age, considering priests were Catholic and we definitely were not Catholic. However, as I got older, I left my religious thinking aside and decided to follow my interest in music. Nevertheless, whilst attempting to woo a young lady in high school, who now ironically works here at WMU, which was scary when I found that out, but I was told I had to start reading again. Because, she said, she wouldn't date an idiot, even if I was musically talented. So she encouraged me to read, and I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and that rekindled my interest in religion, especially the emancipatory and liberational aspects of it. It didn't take long at WMU to realize that my interest in religion and philosophy outweighed my talent as a musician. I still performed in Gold Company, GC2, and other groups here at WMU, but my interest had shifted drastically towards the study of religion, especially due to Dr. Siebert. I can't say I understood everything he was talking about in his classes as an undergrad, but neither could his colleagues. Took solace in that. In fact, Dr. Eid, our beloved late Islamicist, once told me that Rudy teaches Rudy Siebertism, an eclectic and agnostic-like philosophy that is a closed semantic universe that is impenetrable to the uninitiated. Yep, this only made me take more of Rudy's classes, as there was something there that was so enlightening that I had to learn more. One brief story. One time, my wife took a class with me, one of Rudy's class, and I was listening to the lecture. This was her first class, and she was reading Rudy's book, From Critical Theory to Critical Political Theology, which in the second chapter, all of us students know chapter 2 and 6 of that book, it talks about the theodicy problem and the death of his beloved wife. And as I was listening to the lecture, she was reading the book, and I happened to glance over at her and found her sobbing in tears. Right? And even to this day, years later, which we don't talk a whole lot, we're divorced now, we don't talk a whole lot about a whole lot of things, but that is one thing she'll still talk to me about that time where she read Dr. Siebert's book. She should have been paying attention to class, but nevertheless. So, by the time I graduated with my BA, I knew two things. First, to my frustration, I still didn't understand enough critical theory and the immense amount of philosophy, theology, psychology, sociology that undergirds it. And second, I wanted to continue to study it with Dr. Siebert. Thus my MA at WMU, wherein I applied Rudy's Critical Theory of Religion and Revolution to the Iranian Revolution. This study, my MA thesis, ended up being my first published book. For my PhD, I went to MSU's Department of Philosophy, wherein I challenged many a philosopher on the subject of religion, using Rudy's Critical Theory of Religion and Society. Most philosophers have a poor understanding of religion, so in many ways, I was a pariah in the department. However, my work with Rudy here at WMU, especially in the philosophies of Kant, Hegel, Marx, and the Frankfurt School, prepared me for the rigorous work I did there. Rudy served on my dissertation committee at MSU and was my harshest critic. When I asked Dr. Christian Lotz, the other German critical theorist who was on the committee, after my 3-hour defense of my dissertation, what could I possibly do to make it better, he simply looked at me and said, "Answer all of Rudy's questions." In light of that retirement, his recent retirement, we are engaged in a few important projects I think everyone should know about. First, we're trying to put together a chair in Humanistic Research Center for the Critical Theory of Religion and Society, and we're looking for approximately $2 million to help fund that so we can permanently do the work with critical theory of religion and society here at WMU. We've recently opened up a press, an academic press that will reissue some of Rudy's work as well as previously unpublished Rudy's work. There's now an audio-visual archive of the lectures that Rudy's has done over the course of the years. We had a great fortune to have a good friend who's passed away a few years ago, David, who for approximately 2 decades recorded everything he ever did with Rudy. Both lectures he went to, and so he left those audio tapes, those videotapes with me just before he passed away. And then I also did a lot of recording over the course of the last couple of decades as well. So there are going to be hundreds upon hundreds of hours of video and audio of Rudy online made available. So we'll also be starting a document archive pretty soon as well to make sure that all of his writings over the course of the years are protected and available for study, for future study. So if you know anyone who wants to support that financially, just let me know. So those of us who study with Rudy know precisely how influential he is on the students, whether that is academically or personally. He is a holistic tour de force of what it means to be an engaged academic, one whose concern for the world saturates everything he does, even down to the smallest detail. If we were here, the students of Rudy, now in the world of academia, if we're merely a fraction of the professor, mentor, friend, and revolutionary thinker that he is, then we can consider ourselves a success. So with that being said, long live WMU, long live critical theory, and long live our beloved friend and mentor, Rudy Siebert.
All right. Just a minute while I go technology here. And then technology lets me down. There we go. All right. I can see that I'm going to have a bit of a time keeping everybody in their 20-minute slot.
Doing that already?
All right, first up to bat is Michael Ott, who will be leading us off with his paper on Remembrance, Hope, and Revolutionary Action. Dr. Ott received his PhD in sociology and his MA in comparative religion from WMU. He's an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ who served for 26 years as pastor in three churches in Michigan. He's also an emeritus associate professor of sociology from Grand Valley State University, where he taught and published on the critical theory of religion and society for 14 years. So please welcome up to the stage here, Dr. Ott.
Thank you. The one thing I've never been convicted of is concision. And that's what's being required today. Trying to present, trying to present the critical theory of religion and society of Walter Benjamin in 20 minutes. Noam Chomsky said that he too was never convicted of being concise. And that's why he really never gets invited to discuss on radio interviews or TV interviews anymore, because he goes off and gives the whole dynamic, the dialectical relationships of everything, and people are lost as soon as they hear the word dialectic. Sadly, from Rudy, I've inherited that dialectical mentality, for which I am blessed for the rest of my life. And I mean that. It is a blessing to see things in multifaceted, interconnected, dynamic, critical, revolutionary, yet future-oriented ways, with the possibility of creating a better world, a better future society, far beyond where we are today. So please bear with me. This was going to be my paper, but as I was writing this, I realized that the dialectical mindset was going here, and I should have been going there. I got there, but it went all over the place. So I'm going to try to be as concise and as summary, make a summary of Benjamin's critical theory of religion, which I formulated into basically three categories, or constellations, as Benjamin calls it. Constellations of thoughts, ideas that aren't necessarily connected, but they're related inherently to the topic that they're talking about and focusing on, the idea, in this case, of remembrance, fundamental category of Benjamin. To remember not just what we did yesterday or what we ate 4 days ago at what restaurant, but to remember the victims of history, to remember their sufferings, to remember their hopes, and also to remember that most of those hopes, most of those situations were crushed by the continuum of an empty, dead, dominated society and history of class warfare, which, as Marx saw and named in his Communist Manifesto, this is the history of humanity. It doesn't have to be this way, but it has been since the beginning of history itself. Human mind, critical thought about the historical nature of things. It is about domination, class domination, whether it's of an oligarchy, whether it's of the capitalists, or any authority that takes over for their own benefit, for their own class privilege and right, over and against the others. We must remember not just the continuum of history that is often taught in our classes, of approved history. This is the way things unfolded. But there's a subcurrent underneath all of that, which is really the stories of those that suffered, the victims of this history. And this is what Benjamin wanted us to remember their stories, because they're still alive. By the very fact that their hopes, their dreams have not been fulfilled, they have not been realized. The liberation they hoped and prayed for and suffered for hasn't been realized, because their situation continues today. It continues the suffering, the humiliation, and the deaths of the innocent victims of the same system of domination that, as Marx identified, as religion identifies, is the story of humanity to this point. It can be changed. It can be changed. But we have to figure out how to do that. And that's one of the dynamics of all the religions. But for Benjamin particularly, it was the Abrahamic religion of Judaism, and to some degree Christianity. The prophetic, the messianic, and the eschatological, future-oriented notion about what humanity is, what society can be if we commit to that. Not only faithfully, but rationally, in a solidarity with people, but particularly with the victims of the horror, the barbarism that our history has been. We can identify, I think, quite easily with this, because it's unfolding massively on us right now. Not only here in the United States with the neoliberal, I won't even talk about the orange guy, but the neoliberal class domination that has just run rampant, willfully, privileged, couldn't care less. Laws, this is what Benjamin wants us to remember, but then the second category is hope, to hope beyond what this is. Where does our hope come from? Not from God. The critical theory, in any of its manifestations, is not religious. It's not proclaiming some credo. It's identifying with the victims of history, which we're called to remember, which are often pushed off to the side, forgotten, intentionally so. And if you dare bring it up, you too could have the same experience as those victims. You too can suffer, whether it's academically, politically, professionally, in your own humanity and in your own life. Remembrance, hope, which can inspire us by remembering the hopes of those that have been crushed, which can connect with our own hope and longing for that which is other than what is, not projected out into a metaphysical heaven or kingdom or nirvana, whatever, but a hope that is concrete, revolutionary, and historical, that we can commit to. And that's the third category of Benjamin's theory, is revolutionary praxis. Revolutionary action in the now, in the Jetztzeit, the now time, to create something better, more just, more reconciled, more equal, more in solidarity with each other. So, I don't know how much time I have. That's the prelude. So, Benjamin is, as they all are, Horkheimer and Adorno, Marcuse, Fromm, Benjamin, members of the first generation of the critical theory, Habermas, second generation of the critical theory. The critical theory of religion, as Rudy has taught us, as Dustin was speaking, I've been with Rudy 50 years now. As a student, as a colleague, it's fundamentally because of Rudy that I am and have accomplished whatever I have accomplished that brought the emeritus status from Grand Valley State University. It's because of Rudy and my attempt to embody, incarnate that spirit, and also to determinately negate it, to step beyond it, to negate it, to preserve it, and to further it in new ways that we'll speak to today. This is what the critical theory is about. And in theological or religious terms, this is rooted in what's called apophatic, or negative theology. Benjamin's critical theory of religion specifically, along with Adorno and Horkheimer, give expression to a negative theology, one that looks at the religious categories, sees that their form, their religious form, not their religious content, their religious form is keeping the liberational elements of religion boxed in, reified in many cases. It becomes dogma. It goes nowhere. The hopes and dreams, the longings for the other of all the religions, but specifically the Abrahamic religions, which brought this into history. The incarnation of God in the burning bush, the speaking of God to Moses to take the people, the slaves in Egypt, the Hebrews in Egypt, and liberate them. This is the call of the critical theory of religion, as it negates the religious form and sees its liberational force, purpose in the world. Religion, as Rudy has said many, many times, religion in the critical theory arises from history, from concrete existence, not from revelation so much. That's a faithful statement. Faith is based upon something better is coming. The kingdom of God, the new creation of God is coming. I have faith in this. That's the creed. The critical theory brackets that out a bit, but by internalizing it in the very rational critique of what is that prevents that hoped for better world to be realized. which then is to be taken upon ourselves, and this is almost religious, forgive me for going into my pastoral role, but pick up the cross and follow. To pick up the cross. That was Jesus' statements to his followers. You want to be a follower of mine? Deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow me. In many ways, Jesus was doing the same determinate negation of an abstract theological notion of God by saying, you have faith? The cross of this world, the domination of this world, the class oppression of this world is what you have to pick up. You have to pick up, you have to carry it, you have to critique it, and you have to change it. Benjamin fundamentally did this in his Critical Theory of Religion and Society. I do apologize, there's so much to this that I know I'm running out of time.
Still got 5, 6, 7 minutes.
Really?
Oh yeah. Run with it.
We never do that.
Are you ready?
Start with the conclusion.
Can't do that. I will, though. I had a whole methodological aspect here, but let me jump to the tail end. Thank you, Walter. Benjamin's Critical Theory of Religion, Society, and History was and is no abstract theoretical and thus harmless bourgeois academic waste of time. Its entire intention from its very beginning was the effort to awaken humanity out of its systematically induced, introjected, Marcuse called it. It gets inside of us, it becomes habitual. That's all we know now. Its entire intention was to awaken humanity out of its systematically induced, hallucinatory, phantasmagoric sleep for the purpose of reclaiming humanity's potential of freedom, happiness, and life through the theological, political, historical work of creating a more reconciled future society. Benjamin's critical theory is a call to revolutionary action, but not an idealist, romanticized, idealistic charge into the historical grounded and overwhelming power of ruling class domination. Such thoughtless, immature action does not produce real revolution, meaning the end of history as the class war slaughter bench, or Golgotha as Hegel called it, upon which humanity and nature has been sacrificed. Such passionate and outraged action against the rule of the power elite, as idealistically right and good as it might be, only further empowers the established system of the ruling class domination of the established class war system. To state this allegorically, Kronos, the mythical Greek god personified of empty time, or the god who eats his own children as soon as they're born. Think of a clock. Tick, 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 tick. That's Kronos. That's chronology. Each second devours the second that was there. Each second is gone. It's gone. Forget it. To state this allegorically, Kronos, the Greek god personification of empty time, who in order to protect himself against being overthrown by his children, devours them as soon as they are born. Once again devours Kairos, a strategically revolutionary lightning flash right time for that which is truly new to appear. That's the whole point of chronology. Nothing changes. It just keeps moving on. This is Benjamin's notion of a historical continuum of empty meaninglessness for the masses, not for the elites who rule it. As has been stated, supposedly in my paper, Benjamin's critical theory is the absolute rejection of historical systems of ruling class domination and war. For him, there is not a moment in history that does not carry with it its own revolutionary chance. We need to hear that. For him, and hopefully for us, there is not a moment in history that does not carry with it its own revolutionary chance. Right now, there's a revolutionary chance that is being bled from our minds. Just think of the orange one. Socialism will never be in the United States. authoritarian statement of domination. It's cracked. It's a denial of any newness. It's denial of kairos, the inbreaking now, the incarnational inbreaking of truth, of justice, of hope for liberation of all. How are we doing? 2? As expressed in Benjamin's thesis on history, but also in many of his earlier works, Benjamin dialectically incorporated historical materialism with his messianic theology, because he did have a messianic prophetic theology, to give real revolutionary teeth to his critical theory of religion, society, and history. Yet this inclusion of historical materialism into his theoretical constellation of historical revolution and hope produced increasing confusion and consternation amongst his friends. It still does today. It still did for the positivist Hans Cornelius, who was his dissertation, actually his habilitation, doctoral father, who said this is an incomprehensible morass, and thus rejected Benjamin's attempt to become an academic. Why? Because he couldn't understand, as a positivist, he couldn't understand the dialectical aspect of religion, which was the motivation of Benjamin's entire critical theory of society and religion. In a letter of March 7, 1931, to his friend Max Reichner, Benjamin explained that from the perspective of Kabbalist approach, the Jewish mystical Kabbalah, Kabbalist concepts, the Kabbalist approach to the philosophy of language, he saw a bridge to the way dialectical materialism looks at the world. For the Kabbalah, creation took place through vessels, 10 vessels. In the process of this creation, 7 of the vessels shattered. And the truth of these vessels were scattered throughout the world. Fragments, here, there. The world is not perfect. Why? Because it didn't bring all those vessels of the Creator's truth into play. It all got fragmented. Thus, the task of people today is to go and collect those fragments, to find those fragments. This was a statement Habermas made in 1978 at the Critical Theory of Religion, not the Critical Theory, the Future of Religion course in Dubrovnik. He made the statement, our task is to seek the fragments of reason, gather them together, bring them back into their constellation, if you will, to allow their power to be, as Adorno told, said of Benjamin's whole theory, your theory is like dynamite. And to have the biggest effect, it should be buried deeply into the ground of history and then detonated, so that the now time, the revolutionary now time of a brand new, hopeful future society can be realized. Thank you. Wake up.
There's a little gift from the department.
Oh, wow, thank you.
You're welcome. Next up is
Me again.
you've seen him once before, and now you can see him again.
I don't think that's fair.
Dr. Dustin Byrd will come on up here again. He received his BA and MA in Comparative Religion from the Department of Comparative Religion here at Western Michigan, and later his PhD in Social and Political Philosophy at MSU. And he's currently an Associate Professor of Philosophy and Religion at OLIVET College, and was indispensable in helping to bring you all here today as well. So please welcome up Dr. Dustin J.
So, there's a very abstract sounding title there, but I'll explain it as I go along. This idea for this paper actually came out of my experience a couple years ago. The same week I defended my dissertation, I took my kids on a summer vacation to Virginia, Washington, D.C., and we did the whole Civil War stuff. But one of the things that we did was we went to Monticello to go see Thomas Jefferson's home, and we took the slave tour on that because we wanted to identify with the history, the victims of history, and not necessarily with the ruling masters of history. So we didn't go through the front door, we went through the basement door. But after we got done with that tour, we decided to go get something to eat for dinner. And where did we go? Let's go to the city just down the road, Charlottesville. We happened to walk into that mess that day, Charlottesville in 2017. So I took my kids to the largest Klan rally. So they learned a little bit about American history.
Of domination.
Yeah, and dominated, exactly. It was very interesting. So I threw on my southern accent since my dad's family's from Arkansas, and I went right in and melded right in and started asking questions. It's more Arkansas than North Carolina, brother. So, and forgive me, I didn't have my glasses. I made a mistake, last year when I went to U of M to give a lecture, and I didn't bring my glasses, and so it was, a Spartan going into enemy territory and can't really read what he wrote. They were unforgiving. They were unforgiving. So, nevertheless, this is ethno-apotheosis contra Bilderverbot. So, in the realm of ideas, there is a metapolitical battle taking place between two political theologies. On the one hand, the hegemony of neoliberalism has sparked a ferocious backlash in the form of white nationalism, the alt-right, and in Europe as it's called the New Right, and other identitarian movements in the West. Rooted in a polytheistic deification of ethnos, right, the ethnos of race, or what can be called ethno-apotheosis, these far-right identitarian groups fight for the removal of those who they believe do not belong within their exclusive ethnosphere, primarily Muslims and other dark-skinned immigrants. On the other side of the metapolitical struggle is the Frankfurt School, especially the critical theory of religion as developed by the first generation of Frankfurt School and by Rudy Siebert, which is rooted in the Judaic Bilderverbot, or the ban on making images of the divine. In an attempt to forego another Auschwitz, this side struggles against all attempts to elevate any temporal entity to the level of a godlike absolute, including race, ethnicity, nationhood, or a leader. For the critical theory of religion, Judaism's iconoclasm is translated into ideology critique and is directed against the emerging alternative forms of fascism as well as the neoliberal hegemony that produces them. In essence, the ongoing struggle is between two theopolitical philosophies, one which manufactures idols for the purpose of social exclusivity, and the other that smashes such idols for the purpose of equality, inclusivity, and bringing about now time. Interesting sound coming through. Don't they whistle in some places in Asia when they want to tell you to be quiet? In this essay, I will attempt to elucidate my concept of ethno-apotheosis and explain how a very earthly concept, such as ethnos, can be deified to serve as the fundamental basis of a secular socio-political philosophy. I will also explain the role of Judaism's Bilderverbot in the secular political philosophy of the Frankfurt School and demonstrate how it serves as the negativity inherent within the critique of modern idolatry. In conclusion, I will argue that the greatest task facing the critical theorists of religion today is not how to rescue the neoliberal society and make it more humane, as is often seen with Habermas's work, but rather to determinately negate both sides of the critique of neoliberalism. If critical theory is to play an effective role in this Daseinkampf, as it's being called, or this essence struggle of existence, it must, one, rescue tradition, religion, culture, etc., which is presently co-opted by the far right since the left abandoned it for its ever new identities. And two, it must resist falling into absolute negation and begin to offer positive alternatives to both the neoliberal status quo and the retrotopian return to an idealized, fictionalized, and imagined past, the basis of which has already been negated by the bourgeois Enlightenment. For far-right identitarian movements, including the white nationalists of the United States and the New Right in Western Europe, the neo-traditionalists in Russia, The term ethnos signifies, quote, according to Alexander Dugin, Vladimir Putin's favorite philosopher, ethnos is the community of language, religious belief, daily life, and the sharing of resources and goals as an organic entity written into an accommodating landscape, unquote. It is akin to the classical definition of a nation, which according to Habermas are communities of peoples of the same descent who are integrated geographically in the form of settlements or neighborhoods and culturally by their common language, customs, and traditions. Once a nation is politically organized on the basis of peculiar ethnotic matrix, one arrives at the eight-nation state, wherein the official apparatus of government derives its existence and authority from the nation as a collective and singular entity. In this situation, the state reflects the identity and sometimes the will of the demos, which itself was constituted by ethnos. Yet, while fully sharing the Volkskörper, or the body of the people, is necessary to be a member of the nation, it alone is not sufficient to establish such membership. Membership within a given ethnos does not guarantee full identicality with the community. For that to be the case, the individual must also be identical with the Geist, the spirit of the ethnos. Although it has precedent in Christian thought, the German philosopher Johann Herder formulated the idea that all ethne have an accompanying spirit that is unique and exclusive to them, which is experienced and expressed both as an individual and within the collective. This concept of Völkergeist, or the spirit of the people, was taken up by another German idealist philosopher, Johann Gottlieb Fichte. In his 13th address to the German nation, he writes about how, I'm going to summarize his lengthy quote here, he talks about how every single ethnic group has a given spirit that goes along with it, right? And that somehow that can be lost. Right? The spirit of a people can be lost through the machinations of history if people are not adamant about keeping it pure. This Völkergeist idea would also be taken up by Julius Evola, who has been resurrected lately. And he was so fascist that the fascist government of Italy put him on trial, and his defense was, "I'm more fascist than you, therefore I am not guilty." And they found him not guilty. He was too fascist for the fascists. Right? So the Völkergeist idea would be taken up by Julius Evola, one of the most influential thinkers within the alt-fascist movement. Echoing Fichte, Evola argued that every distinguishable ethnos has a distinguishable and unique determinate spirit, which constitutes its internal aspect and can even serve as its formative cause. According to Evola, the spirit of the race supplies the demos with its own unique historical task, which can be diluted, polluted, and even disfigured beyond recognition through the, quote, admixture of ethnoi. Fichte himself warned of this dysgenic possibility when he wrote, "If these qualities of ethnos are dulled by admixture and worn away by friction, the flatness that results will bring about a separation from spiritual nature, and this in its turn will cause all men to fuse together to their uniform and conjoint destruction." For the various alt-fascist movements that we're now seeing all over the place, modernity in the democratic West has brought about this flattening, this admixture, and it started with the bourgeois Enlightenment and the French Revolution. Against the nationalists, which rejected the liberal idea of nation without a determining ethnos, the bourgeois revolutionaries of the mid-18th century radically severed the demos from the ethnos. Membership within the given nation was no longer determined by the matrix of what Habermas calls the pre-political foundations. He says, each nation is now supposed to be granted the right of political self-determination. The intentional democratic community, the Willensgemeinschaft in German, takes the place of the ethnic community as the basis of the nation. In other words, the bourgeois state redefined the traditional concept of nation away from its biological, linguistic, and cultural basis. It was no longer defined by what a given people inherited from their ancestors, race, language, religion, shared history, tradition, and custom, but rather defined by values, principles, and ideas that were assumed to be universal and thus universally ascribable. Since any member of a given ethnos Being fully human could ascribe to such universal values, principles, and ideals. Every individual held the potential to migrate from their inherited ethnos to a Willensgemeinschaft and become part of that Willensgemeinschaft. The will of the democratic community composed the coordinates of the community, not nature and not political, cultural inheritance. Thus, ascribed nationality gave way to an achieved nationalism, that is, to a conscious product of one's own efforts, according to Habermas. From this political development came the notion of the melting pot, a conglomeration of ethne within a politically defined nation, the e pluribus unum, for which the alt-right now rejects. Oh, how about we get into a little bit more religion? So, the Greek word apotheosis denotes the assimilation of a temporal subject to a divine status, which the Latin word deificatio is its equivalent. It is the process of making divine, an act by which a temporal, created, or material entity, which is subject to all the laws of nature, time, and space, is transfigured into something beyond such time, such nature, and such space. It is an absolute, unconditioned by that which is conditioned. As a deity, an entity thus deified is no longer subject to the confines of history, but rather takes a view of history from outside of history, as if to look upon its own authorship from afar. As such, that which is deified is that which is given sovereignty to define the world according to its will. It is neither dependent of those who deify it, nor is it subject to the will. As an absolute, it remains constant and unaffected by the fickle desires of the temporal. In the Greco-Roman world, the distinction between the realm of the gods and the realm of man was not strictly delineated. Men were often deified for their heroic acts in politics or on the battlefield. Deification was a way of engaging in public memory. It is the process by which the great individual is affixed to the collective memory of the nation, so that the individual and their acts, their valor, their virtue can become an archetype, and therefore a source of emulation for the nation as a whole. Such deification occurs especially when the individual is seen to have embodied the Volkergeist, right? The spirit of the people, a complete assimilation of individual being within national spirit. In fact, the total identicality of the individual with the Volkergeist is a necessary condition for deification. In the present struggle against all fascism, it has become increasingly clear that the central tenet within their movement is ethnos, and that such a tenet has become deified, turned into an axis mundi in the retrotopian politics, right? And as well as the home country-oriented capitalism, as well as their identity philosophy. As a deified entity, ethnos demands obedience, submission, the abandonment of the individual will, the authoritarianism that Dr. Ott talked about. It prohibits any form of individualism that would threaten the collective Dasein, the collective existence, the collective being there. In other words, it demands conformity and sacrifice. This sacrifice is most often expressed in violence or metapolitics against the anatopis, as minorities are being called by the alt-right, the anatopis, people in the wrong place, as it would be, who are responsible for the ethnos' deculturation, right? The deculturation of the West, as they would argue, and in the nice German word that is horrible, but nice at the same time, probably just because I can say it, Überfremdung, which is the over-foreignization, right? Within the European ethnosphere. In exchange for their submission to the abandonment of the individual will and identity, the deified ethnos provides the following. One, it integrates a sense of enrootedness among the woke members of the ethnosphere. Now that's a right-wing woke, not the typical left-wing woke that you hear. Two, it provides a ready-at-hand interpretation of reality, including a reification of racial hierarchies and or justness of racial exclusionism. Three, it sets forth an orientation of action that justifies, glorifies, and sanctifies the defense and reproduction of the ethno-state, which is being called for, which sometimes includes violence against the anatopis. Four, it reveals strict, although sometimes irrational limits of identity, thus revealing the identity of what Carl Schmitt called the enemy, those who do not garnish moral consideration, which is called adiaphorization. 5, it provides access to the realm of the gods via sacred ritual, space, individuals, literature. And 6, the ethno-apotheosis provides a powerful social adhesive, right, in a society that is very atomistic. Powerful social adhesive for all Europeans and European-derived people, right? Those who are bodengebunden, or bound to the soil. Thus, this adhesive binds all members back to the koineme, the simplest unit of society, i.e. its ethnos. As such, ethno-apotheosis is a comprehensive worldview and life philosophy that gives purpose, meaning, and direction for both theory and praxis for those who reject the liberal basis for the modern Willensgemeinschaft, right, the modern willed community. Beautiful, I can do this. The critical theory of the Frankfurt School was first conceived in sadness amidst the ruins of the First World War, wherein the collective madness of expansive capitalism and nationalism resulted in the death of millions of working class people. To the early critical theorists, including Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, Walter Benjamin, Herbert Marcuse, Erich Fromm, Leo Löwenthal, the ideologies that drove the masses into collective suicides for the benefit of the ruling classes cried out for a robust critique, one that would lay bare the nakedness of their master's self-interest. At the heart of this critique was the Jewish Bilderverbot, right? The Judaic second commandment of the Decalogue, thou shalt not make any graven images. The prohibition against this eidolon latreia, as they would say in Greek, or idol worship, is the Jewish tradition, in the Jewish tradition, served as the basis for the Frankfurt School's ideology critique. Horkheimer and Adorno, in their famous book Dialectic of Enlightenment, explained the negativity of Judaism's Bilderverbot, writing, "The Jewish religion brooks no word which might bring solace to the despair of all mortality. It places all hope in the prohibition on invoking falsity as God, the finite as infinite, the lie as truth. The pledge of salvation lies in the rejection of any faith which claims to depict it, knowledge in the denunciation of illusion." In a letter to Mr. Hertz dated September 1st, 1969, just after the death of dear Dr. Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer attempted to explain the centrality of the Bilderverbot, the ban on images, to critical theory, writing, "I may say that critical theory, which we both developed, has its roots in Judaism. It derives from the idea that thou shalt not make any graven images." Horkheimer's colleague, Leo Löwenthal, late in his life, confessed to the centrality of the Bilderverbot in critical theory, saying that it was co-determinative in their work, alongside Kant, Hegel, Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud. In other words, critical theory translated, right, through the determinate negation that Dr. Ott talked about, translated the negativity of the religious Bilderverbot into their secular philosophy, wherein that which engages in apotheosis not only within the theological, but also in the social, political, and cultural, is exposed as a false idol. Maintaining such a Jewish prohibition within the realm of secular philosophy allows the critical theorists to positively express that which ought not to be, while remaining favete linguist. They remain silent about the absolute positive. Right? That which is absolutely good may not be spoken of. Right? As Horkheimer states in 1969, according to critical theory, whatever is purely good, that is, the absolute positive, cannot be represented. On the other hand, we've always explained that what is bad, what is to be changed and improved, can be described in the most diverse fields. The commitment to the secularized Bilderverbot in the political philosophy has critical importance. Utopia, or the sum of all oughts, itself cannot be expressed in positive language. For it too, like the Bilderverbot, is inherently negative. Etymologically, it is a purely negative term. Uk and topos, that which has no place. Therefore, that which is described positively as a utopia is by definition not a utopia, as utopia can have no positive expression, just as the apophatic God of Israel can take no form, physically or linguistically. The critical theorists took this religious turned philosophical idea seriously. For example, in the negative dialectics, and I'll end with this, the materialist longing to grasp the thing aims at the opposite. So the materialism, right? Longing to grasp the thing aims at its opposite. It is only in the absence of images that the full object can be conceived. Such absence concurs with the theological ban on images. Materialism brought that ban into secular form by not permitting utopia to be positively articulated. This is the substance of its negativity. At its most materialistic, materialism comes to agree with theology, and what he means by theology is apophatic theology, negative theology, cipher theology. Materialism agrees with negative theology. That negative theology, which animates the critical theory, then, as you see in the metapolitics of what's going on in the alt-right and the new right, this is the struggle to influence the state and society between these two camps, between those who are on the side of the critical theorists, who are engaging in this ideology critique, and those who are positively articulating the ethno-state as a utopia. Right? One undermines the other, and thus between these two camps, the critical theorists and the new right and the alt-right, you find, primarily find where this struggle is happening. Okay. With that, all right.
I want to welcome in our next speaker is Nicolas Budimir, who teaches sociology and labor studies at Muskegon Community College, specializes in race, ethnicity, social inequalities, sociological theory of the Balkans and the former Soviet Union. It specializes in a lot of different things. And he's here today to present to us. So please welcome Budimir.
Thank you. I love pictures because I'm a community college teacher, so let me just find my pictures here. Where are my pictures? Are they here? They're here. Good. So Rudy, I have to say, I absolutely, where do we unfreeze? I absolutely love Rudy Siebert. That's what I really want to start with. The thing that Rudy did for me is that I grew up in a German-hating Balkan household. And I ran into this German Luftwaffe pilot who came from the former Yugoslavia. My dad was born 1 year to the day after the German invasion in 1942. So we hated Germans in this Serbo-Croatian and Macedonian household. And then I met Rudy and I was like, oh my God, we can love Germans, at least some of them. So my father died 20 some odd years ago and I said, Voislav, I could like this German. So I just absolutely love Rudy Siebert, and he kind of just changed my whole atheistic view of religion. I have to give props to my ex-wife, who is an expert in religion as well, but Rudy was instrumental in that. So what I want to talk about, at the community college we had a, we had a, not a conference, we had a panel discussion. A few colleagues of mine and I got really interested in the contemporary conspiracy theories. So we came up with this title here, Conspiracy Theories in the Light of... Yeah, it looks like I'm teaching conspiracy theories here, in the light of the critical theory of religion. So the thing what we wanted to do was, and just by looking at conspiracy theories, mainly things like the flat earth theory, the Illuminati, UFO conspiracy theories, and some of the conspiracy theories that actually have the critical theory in them, and we can talk about some of them. And I just noticed a few days ago, oh wait, conspiracy theory and critical theory are both CT. Coincidence? So, if I put up CT in this talk, it's conspiracy theory, and I'll write out critical theory. So, basically just conspiracy theories are explanations of social phenomenon that have at their root either some sort of nefarious plot or subgroup with some sort of alternate motive. That's usually a newer academic definition of conspiracy theories. And we have to know they're not all fake. We've already talked about them. Dustin gave us a huge list of partial conspiracy theories. Here are the real conspiracy theories, right? Watergate, Iran-Contra, the FBI COINTEL program that assassinated 20-some-odd Black Panthers in the 1960s. Michael probably remembers that. Rudy probably protested that. The Wannsee Conference, which Rudy has shown us in our great film Conspiracy. These were all real conspiracy theories that actually happened. So they're not all fake news. Some of them kind of are fake news. So I go through, I love pictures. We have lots of pictures of just trying to communicate some of this. So, of course, we have extensive knowledge of alien conspiracy theories. Fox Mulder and Dana Scully, if we've all watched, I know we've all binge-watched X-Files over the decades. The ancient alien conspiracy theories. It's aliens, Rudy! And this is on what used to be, remember, I always forget his name, Tsoukalos. Giorgio Tsoukalos. He's on what used to be the History Channel. What used to be the History Channel is now the Conspiracy Theory Channel. Area 51, I almost put Rudy's plane landing there. There were a lot of planes in conspiracy theories. I censored myself by putting a text box that's saying, is Rudy Siebert flying that plane? 9/11 conspiracy theories. Truthers, 9/11 truthers. Is George Bush in this window planting planes? That plane didn't even exist according to these conspiracy theories. And the believers have an impenetrable belief in the theory. So many Kennedy conspiracy theories. We went from about 82% of the general public believing in the single assassin theory in 1964, I believe, after the Warren Commission coming out. Only 28% of the public believe that today, that there was one single assassin. I can't remember the single assassin theory. The Illuminati, or the Rudinati. Yeah, I put in a lot of corny jokes referring to our beloved Rudy. The Illuminati, and this we might get to this later. This is not explicitly a right-wing conspiracy. This can very much be a left-wing conspiracy. I have a little chart about when it became popular. I'll show you. It actually became popularized around the same time that the Occupy Wall Street movement became popular, around 2011. So you can meet a lot of sort of liberal left, pseudo-liberal, pseudo-left people who are Illuminati conspiracy theorists. The one I've been researching the most, and probably the most insane one, is the flat earth theory, where the sun and the moon sort of wobble around in the sky, and if you go too far, you'll either fall off or run into the wall of Antarctica. I gotta tell you, there's a wonderful Netflix documentary, Beneath the... Did you see it? I really recommend it. It's very well done, and it also contains within it attempts to, as Rudy would tell us, reconcile the two, the extremist believers in the flat earth theory and the maybe over-secularized scientists or scientism. I really recommend it. It's on Netflix. If you pay the bourgeois for your account, I would watch it. Chemtrails, again with the planes. A lot of these conspiracy theories have planes in them. If you don't know the chemtrail theory, it's the idea that, again, secret government project to change the skies Some chemtrail theorists believe that these chemicals are, just as the right-winger Alex Jones says, making the frogs gay. So that the chemicals are transforming somehow our genome to make people more lesbian, gay, trans, etc. So thank chemtrails for LGBT liberation. But this, one researcher, Alan Hill, a sociologist who's now retired, who did a lot of research on UFO phenomenon and on chemtrails, said the UFO folks seem reasonable and logical compared to the chemtrailers. And that's Alan Hill. I know we've all mentioned, and I thank you so much, Dr. Ott, for mentioning the first Orange president. Birtherism, right? One thought, one reason why we're all talking about conspiracy theories now is because POTUS, President of the United States, is the major purveyor, along with Fox News, Breitbart, and Alex Jones, of conspiracy theories. And we would also mention this particular conspiracy theory is right-wing and racist because it attempted so strongly to undermine the first black president of the United States. Here is our CT, critical theory. Oh wait, yes, arrow. Where's my arrow? There. That's what Rudy, Dustin, Walter, Nicolas do. We indoctrinate. I should have said trigger warning because this thing does contain extremely racist images. So excuse me for not including the trigger theory. So at the center of what's called cultural Marxism, you'll hear it on Fox News often. What's his name? The horrible dresser with the bow tie. Tucker. I almost said Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson refers to this all the time. The Breitbart folks and the ethno-state, ethno-nationalists in the alt-right, like Richard Spencer, refer to this all the time. The theory, valid for us. How are we on time?
Doing all right.
Oh, doing all right, great. The theory is that we, the Bolsheviks, failed to revolutionize the world in 1917, and the Jewish Bolsheviks, see, I'm learning from Rudy, simply penetrated the university and through indoctrination have spread Bolshevism in the guise of the critical theory and have led to miscegenation, which ties in very well to what Dustin talked about the pure ethnos and the, is it the Rhine? Something is Rhine, something is pure. No German, only Russian. Yes, yeah, Lebensraum. So the critical theory, according to this cultural Marxism, conspiracy theory is that it's how Bolshevism, Marxism, and secret Judaism is undermining Western civilization and whiteness as well through, again, LGBT liberation movements, black liberation movements, brown liberation movements, and somehow Marcuse is responsible for all of it. And of course, the granddaddy of all conspiracy theories, which is the whatever we want to call it, the great anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, the Jewish banking conspiracy that Hitler talked about on the eve of the First World War. Rudy quotes that speech all the time. Our students today, when we talk about this, don't quite understand the connection, and I explained it to them, and in a way it was an aha movement, that World War II was caused by a massive conspiracy theory. Why did Germany invade Poland, etc.? It was in order to, quote unquote, save the world from Jewish capitalistic Bolshevism. The whole war was based on a conspiracy theory. Students today don't get the idea the connection between Nazism and conspiracy theories. How old are they? I can summarize this pretty quick. How old are they? They're very old. Could the book of Job even be a conspiracy theory? We know that conspiracy theories have been very common throughout history. How common are they today? They're very common. The internet gives them a brand new life. We already mentioned that. I already mentioned all of this. President Alex Jones and Breitbart give them all a brand new life. Very quickly, you can kind of see, this is about Occupy Wall Street, and you can see the real growth on Google of trends for the Illuminati, trends for the flat earth, it's really popular recently, trends for cultural Marxism, this is probably a Trump speech. Really quickly, the way I conceptualize conspiracy theories and the critical theory, we have a godless, demythologized world, whether we're referring to Max Weber, Nietzsche, or some of our other, many of the other critical theorists. We have a godless world that has no meaning except for secularism, secularity, and science. Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson's wonderful world, but for many it can be very anxiety-producing. Rudy, in his critical theory of religion, called this a modern identity crisis. His quote, "The breakdown of the ability to engage in intersubjectivity reflected self-understanding." Basically, it seemed like to me Rudy was saying we can't talk to each other, or we're talking past each other. And the believers in, for example, the flat earth have no belief in or put no validity in modern scientific thinking. I already mentioned this. People are anxious, alienated, and unsatisfied. Therefore, they need the Holy Gourd of Jerusalem. What do the conspiracy theories do? We don't have to read the quote, even though it was a good quote from Rudy. Basically, they recreate a sacred canopy for those who feel undermined and alienated by the technologically dominated world. Especially the flat earth creates an enormously beautiful cosmology. We are, if you talk to flat earthers, we are in God's sacred terrarium. We are his ants. He is taking care of us. Some flat earthers are biblical literalists, and they will attend the conferences that we look at. I'll skip the quote if we wanted to come back to it. That's essentially what we're talking about. It's a re-mythologization of the world. We have this maintenance of worldviews. The conspiracy theorists continually are self-referential to each other and self-reinforcing rather than self-correcting, which is this scientistic belief. To some extent, science probably does not self-correct, although we do better. We have different epistemologies. Right, I thought I was clever, maybe overpaid and clever. We have two epistemologies, research versus revelation, eureka versus hallelujah. And it occurred to me that the version of the critical theory that we're all working with is seeking to negate and to sublimate these two very different ways of knowing and thinking. At the very end, do conspiracy theories, Illuminati, flat earth, cultural Marxism, do they liberate? And to bring it back to what the three alternative futures that Rudy talks about, my assessment, I of course could be very wrong, is that at best they serve as warnings. So I don't want to say that these people are stupid. Maybe I should have warned that at the... These are not stupid people. These are folks who are attempting to understand in a very possibly distorted or alienated way. At best, these are folks who are maybe in a distorted way warning us about alternative futures 1 and 2. That's the administered society and the militarized society, if I'm getting it right, not the reconciled society. Can conspiracy theories work with the live on the flat earth? No, they are incompatible. Thank you all so much.
Next up on the list is Dr. Toby Johnson, who received his MA in Comparative Religion at WMU, and after that completed his PhD at UC Riverside, and is currently a visiting assistant professor in the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Lynchburg. So please welcome him to the stage. And
well, and now for something completely different. So thank you for having me. It's fun to be back. Dr. Siebert, congratulations. Thanks for everything. This is a little bit more of a reflection on what the hell happened to me here. Some of you, it's your fault, and I appreciate it. So it's fun looking back, because I realized 20 years ago this month, I was actually preparing my application for the master's program here at Western Michigan's Department of Comparative Religion. I remember writing this wonderful statement of purpose that highlighted my love of religious storytelling as a teaching tool, a love rooted in my love of science fiction stories. And honestly, I could give an entire talk about the parallel lives of the Sikh gurus and Star Wars conflicts with evil empires, but that's going to have to wait for another conference. To me, such stories were at the heart of religion. Morality, duty, a call to action. As I reflect on that beginning, which attracted enough attention of the department to actually bring me here to Kalamazoo in the fall of 2000, I could begin my work here. And the Department of Comparative Religion drew my attention at that time because of that word comparative. And I thought I'd be comparing stories from different traditions, and I didn't realize that the journey they had in store for me was quite different. When I arrived, I came to realize that the comparisons I was looking for were not the ones the professors had in store for me. They wanted to compare theory. So in honor of Dr. Siebert's work, I offer the following as a note of thanks for fostering discussions of theory and its impact on me as an emerging scholar. For the faculty in attendance, consider this my acknowledgement of your wisdom. For the students, take this as evidence that the trek is worth it. For those welcome guests joining us here today, here's an insider's view of learning about the importance of questions and the variety of theory work that can be done in pursuit of learning in religious studies. Now allow me to proceed through a brief discussion of my work here at Western Michigan, and then illustrate how the discussion of theory, promoted most enthusiastically by Dr. Siebert and Dr. Lawson, came to influence my work and continues to do so today. So walking into my first days at Western, I was ready for a deep dive into the stories of Sikh history and the Islamic context in which they were set. You can see where I have no Greek or German to quote throughout all of this. I studied Asian. Okay, so I was ready to learn the history of Islam in India that created the society in which the Sikh faith was born. I wanted to explore how faith communities engaged in dialogue with one another. And in that first semester, I was enrolled in courses on early Islamic history, a survey of religious traditions of the world, and something called Classics in Comparative Religion. Now, Dr. Ead's Islamic history class was just what you'd expect. A dry reading through the chronology. Thank you for helping. It all makes sense now. The chronology of Islam's development. And if you ever sat through Dr. Ead's class, you know. Chronology. But it was through the development of Islam as a religion and its early expansion. But he let me focus on Islam's steps into South Asia. Now, Dr. Lawson led the survey seminar preparing us to teach religions of the world in the following semester. And it was a super fast journey through the major faiths, taking special care to address how to get grad students to engage with the material. But it was Dr. Wilson's Classic and Comparative Religion that opened my eyes to this new focus in religious studies and prepared me to better engage in the debates that truly shaped the field. The Classics course set out a critical review of how the field of religious studies developed, moving from the earliest scholars to tackle the notion of religion as a cultural phenomenon to those notions that influence our own professors at Western. We covered the giants of the field: Fraser, Evans, Pritchard, Durkheim, Weber, Locke, Eliade, and many more. We discussed 2 or 3 a week for 15 weeks, introducing, analyzing, and critiquing their approaches. Now, at the time, I saw it all as a distraction from the myths and histories that I wanted to study. I wasn't concerned about studying scholars and their theories. I wanted stories. I felt so out of place. I even called a few of my undergraduate professors to complain. And they told me to just learn this stuff and so I could use it to get to the stuff I wanted. I viewed it as a speed bump along the way. The goal, as I realized far more clearly now looking back on the experience, was to cultivate a critical approach to our studies, navigating our way through the discourse to find our own footing and to prepare us for the debates and defenses that we'd find ourselves in as we grew as scholars. What I did not know is that I'd be facing such debates in the department and a need to find my footing right away, as those things were occurring right down the hall by 2 giants of their fields in their offices. At the time, there were clearly 2 major camps, if you will, in comparative religion: Dr. Lawson's Cognitive Science of Religion and Dr. Siebert's Critical Theory. Each had their PhD students, and the debates spilled into almost every conversation in the hallways in our offices. And my first hints of this emerged in Dr. Lawson's World Religion Survey, as he cast much of our discussion in light of his other works, and the students working with Dr. Siebert would then reframe those issues in the parameters of critical theory. And I sat there going, like watching a tennis match. To see them debate it was fun. And they'd go back and forth in the best way to engage the topic. And if this weren't dramatic enough, I eventually ended up in an office with Drs. Byrd and McCorkle. And it was daily. But I saw their theories develop, their ability to argue this develop. I recall Jason Sloan developing his work on theological incoherence, and Todd Tremlin working on the cognitive roots of supernatural belief. These were developing theories happening right in the hallway, that I'm sitting there watching this happen. And I came to realize that an essential feature of these debates rested in the questions that motivated the inquiry, and that each position sought their direct inquiry in ways that answered their concerns most directly. Well, the questions that interested me most at the time were the ones concerned with the transmission of ideas and stories through religious communities within and without to others. So with Dr. Lawson's guidance, I was able to approach the problem that is the origin of the Sikh community within the Muslim and Hindu context of the 16th century. How did the first Sikh, Guru Nanak, who coincidentally would have been 550 years old this week, create a new religious community out of supposedly incommensurate ideologies? Typical answers to this fell back on simple understandings of religious syncretism, making it sound as if Guru Nanak, made his religion from a buffet of beliefs in front of him, choosing a plate of theology and practice that best suited his needs. I never found that satisfying, and it was actually quite dismissive of Guru Nanak's creativity and unique standing. So in my thesis, Keeping the Guru in Mind, Cognition, Communication, and Developing Sikh Tradition, I shifted my attention to tracing, as Dan Sperber suggested, an epidemiology of representations, akin to tracking a virus through the spread of a population. But by making a model, or making an attempt to model how the major themes of Sikhism grew out of the religious conversations of the Punjab. I worked to illustrate how various religious groups interacted with or simply responded to one another. So I focused on 4 criteria that express both the understandings of gods and their relation to the world and its people, as well as how these religions prescribed religious action and the forms that action would take. It was really weird revisiting my master's thesis so many years later, looking back on this. But I sought to illustrate, these on simple spectrums that would help visualize the exchange and divergence of the various religious communities from which the early Sikh Panth drew its adherents, with both Sunni and Muslims present, as well as various Bhakti groups, and the emergent Sant movement that already bridged many of these notions. I was able to discern what you may call a map of belief, if you will, for the region. You know, mapping out where things sort of fell. The next step involved understanding how Guru Nanak's new message fit into the context of those beliefs. I had finally gotten to a project that did the type of comparative religion that I thought I'd be doing, but it was now rooted in a theory that facilitated the comparisons. The task of my thesis was to see how Sikh beliefs, as expressed through Guru Nanak's verses, both drew from and creatively engaged the traditions around him. So this can be seen most clearly in the direct comparison of the fourth criterion, that the system of religious action. Each of these can be seen as a direct reaction to the predecessor. The Sufis reject the ritualization and routinization of the Sunnis, the Sants reject the puja or ritual action of the Bhakti cults, and Nanak's own message fell closely in line with the Sants, but also rejected some of the ritualized actions within it, most notably the morning prayers and ablutions. Interestingly enough, though, Nanak's teachings are very similar to the Sufis in their general demeanor regarding the criteria. Now, Nanak rebukes many of the earlier traditions, practices, advocating a shift of his message of love and humility focused on the name of God. So there's your briefest lesson on Sikhism you'll ever get. It wasn't a complete theological analysis, and looking back, I'd certainly do a few things differently, but I contend that the theoretical basis for these comparisons is both valid and valuable. The cognitive science of religion is predicated on the commonality of human minds, that our brains operate in similar ways and organize our thinking in specific ways, a principle known as an intuitive ontology. But that we fill these templates of those structures with different cultural information. My thesis explored this in ways I had not realized were possible when I started at Western Michigan. So, after a few trips to India, a few years starting a family, I got back into academia by starting my doctoral work at the University of California, Riverside. I was fortunate to be able to work with a scholar I'd long admired, Professor Kishore Singh. Now, Dr. Singh's specialty was the study of the Sikh sacred text, the Guru Granth Sahib. And I wanted to specifically work on the stories of Guru Nanak, you know, these life stories known as the Janam Sakhis. So I engaged a new theoretical horizon, textual studies and hermeneutics. While we approached these stories in more traditional ways, I realized there were materials that did not fit well with those models. It had come to my attention that despite being rooted in a tradition of historical manuscripts, the Janam Sakhis were most commonly portrayed in children's books and new online forms which required new questions to be asked of them. So I first looked at the educational role of Sikh children's literature, presentations of Janam Sakhis and their related stories, and their influence on the maintenance of a traditional Sikh identity when confronted with the diversity of religious cultures in Sikh children's literature and identity, a paper presented in Sikhism in Global Context. I explored the broader impact of the Janam Sakhis as multifaceted foundation for folk heritage of Sikh Americans in articles for the Encyclopedia of Asian American Folklore. So realizing that a more in-depth analysis of modern Janam Sakhis presentations required new frameworks in which to explore how Sikhs engage, interpret, and represent these stories today, those thoughts led me to construct a comparative model that would look into account how scholarly discussions about the Janam Sakhis are as instructive as the discussions within those stories. And so I put forth this model in a paper called Pedagogy in the Janam Sakhis, Teaching Text Moving Past Old Categories. It was included in this volume titled Reimagining South Asia. And in that piece I built from the work of a narrative theorist, Seymour Chapman, who sought to incorporate the variety of voices and audiences at play within a text. So if you've ever read this, the idea of who really wrote it, an implied author within the text, the narrator, to whom the narration is received, the implied reader, a real reader, And we modified that, you know, to account for how Sikhs sought to present and interpret the life stories of Guru Nanak. And I began with critical interrogations of the scholarly positions and premises upon which they built them. This allowed me to compare how scholars' discussion of the Janam Sakhis constructed specific modes of engagement with readers and created distinctive pedagogical programs through their own analyses. Therefore, a comparison of scholarly works that construct their views of the Janam Sakhis as hagiographic texts differs quite differently from the direct application of Guru Nanak's good news to the lives of the listeners in a manner akin to homilies given within a Christian setting. And you can see how they conceive the roles differently within the narrative and for readers. They're quite different. These comparisons allowed me to do a more comprehensive accounting of the various approaches that Sikhs and academics brought to bear upon these stories. Now, around that same time, I was lucky to participate in the Cognition, Religion, and Theology project, a Templeton-funded project out of Oxford University, offering training and assistance in developing investigations rooted in the cognitive science of religion. I jumped at the opportunity knowing that this could help me explore aspects of the Janam Sakhis in new ways. And in my proposal for the program, I expressed the difficult place in which I found my work growing. That somewhere between Boyer's work on the counterintuitive ideas and Sperber's epidemiology of representation lies the key to examining both how and why these Sikh texts are so successful in conveying the tradition of Guru Nanak to adherents. I propose that an examination of the Janam Sakhis, which considers the cognitive structures incorporated into these pseudo-historical homiletic narratives in their various forms, from the manuscripts, the translations, the web culture iterations, and children's books, aid and inform the transmission of Sikh tradition. So I'm most interested in the idea of representation of religious ideas and the traditions made to convey and instruct them within the community. So after much deliberation, discussion with project leaders, I looked to explore a simple hypothesis. Was the promotion of the most popular Janam Sakhi anecdotes tied to the strength of their presentation of the message of Guru Nanak? It was a question that allowed me to draw together a number of theoretical threads that have motivated my work, tying together notions of how communities come together around stories, the value of commemorating Guru Nanak through these stories, revisiting how the Janam Sakhis transmit Sikh teachings, and how those doctrines are explicated within the stories themselves. And the project created a new methodology that demonstrates how the transmission of moral doctrine can be identified and quantified to facilitate comparison between different iterations of such texts, and of the discourse about the life of Guru Nanak that surrounds this literature. While it's not able to confirm the hypothesis, I did learn some valuable lessons about the value of text coding exercises, especially that coders, despite their weaknesses, represent this furthest end of an epidemiology of representations, much like folks who read these texts in the world. So that project informed a lot of what went into my dissertation, Living and Learning with Guru Nanak, Participation and Pedagogy in the Janam Sakhi Narratives, and shifted my thinking from more traditional critical historical textual analyses to a program that better incorporates the active life of a text as a pedagogical program itself, while advancing the claim that pedagogy informs participation and demonstrating how various Janam Sakhi authors conditioned their pedagogical presentations of Guru Nanak's life story through the form and content of the presentation. My dissertation examined the impact of the Janam Sakhis not simply as historical relics, but as holding a continuing role facilitating and conditioning Sikhs' relationship with Guru Nanak and the Panth. Most importantly, it served as an interdisciplinary exercise, highlighting new areas and approaches to Sikh texts, broader concerns about Asian identity, and connected it all with the work, with the theory work that I've discussed here today. This journey began with my first steps here at Western Michigan, where I learned that theory informs and molds our discipline. I'm still able to engage the stories I love so much, and I have a better understanding of comparative religion and its value as an investigative discipline. I learned from the examples set forth here. So my thanks to the professors that put me on this journey. They fostered the discourses that have shaped my work, and we're here to celebrate the contribution of Dr. Siebert, and as one who's tangentially benefited from his guidance and the conversation his work spurred. I can just say his influence was great, but you all know that.
Somebody say it tonight.
Yeah, okay, we'll go to hockey.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, next up, Dr. Lee McCorkle, who unfortunately will not be presenting us an instrumental today.
You should have brought the whole kit up. That would have do songs.
He received his MA in Comparative Religion from WMU and went on to earn his PhD at the Institute of Cognition and Culture at Queen's University in Belfast. He served as the director of the Laboratory for the Experimental Research of Religion, associate professor in the Department of the Study of Religions at
Masaryk.
Thank you, Masaryk University. I study Japan, so anything that's not in English or Japanese I have a hard time with. He's written extensively, published extensively, and so we're happy to have him here today. So with a round of applause for...
Thank you, Professor COVELL, Dr. Byrd. I want to thank Professor Lawson, who was here when I first started in 1996, and Professor Wilson when I finished. And thank you to all of you for taking the time to come and celebrate Rudy Siebert's career. Can't believe he's actually retiring. Never thought I would see the day. But in any case, enjoy it, Rudy. All these people that are here and many other people that are not with us today, I'm sure have a lot of love for you and the things that you've done for your students. And I think that's something that people don't get to talk about because we're in the intellectual, academic sort of mind frame. In any case, this is probably the shortest PowerPoint presentation that I've ever given in my life. If you know me, I give 50 PowerPoints at a conference. I love pictures. Where's our fellow? Yeah, love pictures, man. Pictures are great. Sounds are even better. So this one's the smallest. One day maybe I'll get it down to one. As Bob McCauley, I need to get it down to one PowerPoint slide, and then I will have achieved some sort of mastery over the academic world. In any case, my presentation is really about a sort of culmination of being a student in this department. I was fortunate enough to come here from North Carolina, where I studied with a lot of great historians of religions. I came, of course, thinking that I was going to dive in, and I already knew what I wanted to do, and of course, when I got to Western, it was completely confused. You had, as Dustin and Toby and various ping pong between some of the great sort of theories and methods going on in the department, and in a way, it brought me full circle to where I am now. And when I was in Belfast and in Byrd, people would ask me about, what was it like in Western when you were there? It's like this magical sort of element that was going on. And in a way, it really was a magical thing. Of course, my life was in the, you know, as Dustin and Toby, we shared the office together for a short amount of time. You know, your entire career can change from one day to the day as being a student. So I decided to take to something that I've been interested in for a little while. There's an HBO special called Rome that was on a few years back. It's 2 seasons. It was really, really good. I mean, it's basically, I guess, the lost leader for what became Game of Thrones, that they could do programs of that magnitude. And if you followed it, one of the key interests that I had was on this particular guild of people that followed the magistrates around. Does anybody know who these 3 people are on this coin here? I'm gonna take a stab.
The 3 wise men.
Yes, they're the 3 wise men. These are the lictors, right? The lictor guild. And they represented this quasi-religious association of trade, a trade guild or a collection of trade guilds. And they were the private security force, right, for people of at least magistrate status, right? And in their hands, you see, and this is where I became fascinated, is that there's a scene in Rome where Brutus says to Mark Antony, he says, we have the lictor guilds on our side. And of course Mark Antony's like, take your, lictor guilds and shove them up your whatever. But the idea was that the lictor guilds were that important that Brutus felt the need to say, well, the lictor guilds are with us, so you should come around. And who were the lictor guilds? They were these powerful trade, sort of pre-corporate, private mercenary or army type of group, security force, that protected the people in power, the politicians, right, of a certain level. And in their hands, they have these bundles that are rolled up with an axe in them, okay? The lictor guilds came to your house, they would bang on the door with these things, and of course you would open up because the lictor guilds would probably be the end of you if you didn't open up, right? And they would guard the place while the magistrate would enter your sort of residence. And does anyone want to take a stab at what these things are called that they're holding, these bundles? Yes?
Fascists.
Right. Fascism, right? And this is where at least one of the origins for fascism comes from, right? That the idea that Rudy turned me on to years and years ago, that there was something about corporatism that was related to this sort of fascist sort of historical development. And we can see this slowly over time, is that the people that are involved now in the fascism, the new fascism of today, they are not necessarily carrying machine guns. They're not, wearing the sort of attire that we're used to. What are they wearing?
Tweed suits.
They're wearing the suits, right? And as I woke up today, I realized that I'm wearing the blue suit, which is from Rome, which, some sort of irony. In any case, we'll come back to that in a minute. Rudy did always say I had a positivist streak in my writing. So, in any case, when we talk about theory and method, I was so excited to get here. Bruce Lawrence, who was one of my mentors at Duke University, told me that when I was looking at graduate schools, I was a historian of religions. My James Sanford, who was my advisor at Chapel Hill, said, don't want to be historian of religions, man. You'll be that weird dude in the corner. Don't do that. He's like, no one will take you seriously because they won't understand you. Run and hide. But Bruce Lawrence, on the other hand, said, don't shirk from the theory and method side. Don't ever shirk from it. I know you're interested in Buddhism, but keep going with the Buddhism. But remember, theory and method is where the pot of gold is. Okay, so I kept that in sort of the back of my mind as I entered this sort of Disneyland of comparative religion when I came to Western Michigan. I have decided to use this particular picture because, and I didn't really think about it at first, I'm a professional musician as well. I've become fascinated by electronic music, especially modular experimental music. And you see that I have the stained glass window, and then I have the little, what they used to have in huge, gigantic labs in Germany, right? Kraftwerk. This sort of synthesizers that are patched and they're modular and make you these sounds. And you can ask me about it later. I'm fascinated by the modular synthesizer world now. But it occurred to me that when I'm talking about fascism, religious studies and the critical theory and theories and methods is absolutely crucial to the discussion. Okay? You're going to ask me, religion, fascism, I can see the cult-like similarities, but where does that intertwine with each other? And of course, anyone that's ever gone to the AAR, American Academy of Religion, right? I sometimes refer to it as American Theological Association. And the Nasser panels especially, you will see, we all know from theory and method, from history of religions, right, from critical theory, that religion, the term, is an academic construct, okay? Primarily of the last 200, 150 years, right? By academic Westerners, typically in the Protestant tradition, but let's not just pick on Protestants, we can pick on everybody. And that religion is a heuristic that we use to describe particular behaviors and beliefs that enabled us to dive deeper, to unpeel the onion. Okay? And it was Pascal Boyer, the evolutionary sort of anthropologist, that said, it's okay to study things in a heuristic way, but we're never going to get the meat if we don't break it down, because that actual thing does not exist. Okay? So in Religion Explained, Pascal Boyer says, we need to start looking at the aggregate forms of that particular heuristic that we're trying to seek out and understand. And this is one of the reasons why the funny thing about Pascal's book, Religion Explained, is he basically says it, if not explicitly, implicitly, that you can't ever get to a definition or explain religion because religion is not a real thing, right? And this is why most of these particular definitions fail, right? Even though some of them are better than others. And so what we've learned from the aggregate forms is maybe if religion is not a natural category, right? Natural category, that's a second order category, that we can do the same thing with fascism, right? Fascism is a constructed category. But that doesn't mean we have to follow down the rabbit hole and say that it can't be studied, it can't be researched, it can't be teased apart, it can't be, looked at from different perspectives. And what I find in religious studies, the biggest problems that I see are that, as Luther Martin, a mentor and a colleague of mine, says, we have this problem in religious studies where we're rich in theories, but we have a poverty of methods. And it's not okay just to say, oh, I'm doing anthropology of religion, or I'm doing sociology of religion, or psychology of religion. Those are disciplines. Those are not methods, right? So the idea of the critical theorist, of the philosopher of science, of the historian of religions, is to actually provide methodological inspiration to go and tease these kinds of things apart, okay? Now, so what can we learn from comparative religion? When I came here, I had the ping pong between Rudy and Tom Lawson, back and forth, right? But the thing is, this sort of dialectical, theoretical sort of challenge between the two allowed me to understand that instead of clutching at grandiose things, that I could actually really define, start to look at more carefully the things that I was interested in, okay? So in a way, even though at the beginning it provided me with I'm way out of my league. I'll never forget Tom Lawson saying, Claude Levi-Strauss, man, you better master it by next week. And I read it and I went, what in the hell did I get myself into? Right? And then Rudy coming to class, and I used to love the seminar room. The seminar room is the best thing that was ever, the department was able to have. That was incredible, to sit in the seminar room and fight these things out. And Rudy would come in and go, you need to start thinking more dialectically, McCorkle, Lee. And I was like, dialectical? And he goes, yeah, watch this Roger and Me movie. This is way before Michael Moore was a famous person, by the way. And when I watched Roger and Me, all those books that I had read, in Chapel Hill and Duke, and when I came here, it was like a lightning bolt, what dialectical actually meant, right? And even if you are to provide what Rudy would probably call a positivist thesis, you can still do a dialectical thesis. And I challenge my students to do this. That's sometimes the harder job, right? But comparative religion allows us as scholars to study things self-critically. I don't know many disciplines that do this, other than maybe philosophy of science, right? Think about it. When I talk to psychologists, they never think to even say, well, we're really not sure about the history of our field because, how did this psychology that we practice, how did it come into place? In fact, I don't know anybody in psychology that has a history of psychology, type like the history of religions. And I presented this to a colleague in Texas, in Austin, and she said, I've never really thought about it before. Never really thought about where psychology comes from. So there's a very valuable lesson in that comparative religion, of course, allows us to be self-reflective, but that doesn't mean we have to go down the rabbit hole and say that we can never solve the problems. And I think a lot of people at the AAR and in Nassar have fallen down this rabbit hole where they're still talking about the same things, right? It's one thing to contextualize and to reevaluate, but you actually have to move somewhere. And I think that we need to think in the idea of the Renaissance as scholars. 1 foot in the past and 1 foot in the future. Okay, and I know that's hard to do for a lot of people, but we have to move forward, and we have a lot of responsibility, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And it was Bob McCorkle at Emory that explained how we could do this, and he called it explanatory pluralism. Not all things can be described at certain levels of analysis. Low level, not all things can be described at the physical level, or the chemical level, or the genetic level, or all the way up to the cultural level. Not all things can be described at the cultural level, right? So we have to start thinking that these particular disciplinary approaches are not necessarily going against each other, that they are part of the very complicated human condition. And if nothing else, it's because I study comparative religion that I'm able to say something like that, as opposed to my particular way that I study religion is the way. That would be very fascist of me, by the way. And so, in other words, when we look at religion, what Rudy introduced us to is that religion is really a cultural thing. I don't even, in the books that I've written or edited, I don't even need to use the last book that Jason Sloan and I edited, Cognitive Science of Religion. It's about methodologies, experiments that have been conducted. We didn't even need to use the term religion in the book. Of course, the publisher wanted it in the title, right, because it sells books. But we didn't even need to use it because we've already dropped it down into the aggregate forms. At conferences, you can use the term religion, but religion is really just a heuristic of culture, right? And I would argue that fascism, as Rudy has done throughout his career, can be studied in a similar way, or in a similar way, or the same way. All right. So as I put the suit on today, I thought about my little title with Neil Young, and about the blue suits of today that are what fascism is. Corporatism is just taken a new name. And I'm not equating fascism of today to being just like fascism of the 1930s and 40s in Italy and Nazi Germany. It can have different contextual appearances, right? The cultural tokens. And I decided to take the windmill because this presentation, Dustin and I have been talking about this presentation for over a year. I decided not to use our current emperor with no clothes in the title after watching Salman Rushdie on Bill Maher. And he has a new book out. I don't know if you've seen it or not. And it's about the current administrative sort of predicament that we're in, being related to Don Quixote. And he doesn't mention anybody by name, but it has this sort of Chuang-Tzu type of vibe to it, where the reality has become surreal enough to where you don't know whether you're a Chuang-Tzu dreaming you're the butterfly, or you're the butterfly dreaming you're Chuang-Tzu. Salman Rushdie, of course, is a genius in literature. And so, are we chasing windmills? And windmill is actually a great sort of analogy, because windmills represent what?
Cause cancer.
They cause cancer. Conspiracy theories, right? Windmills represent this sort of whole debate over climate change, right? Green energy, the Green New Deal, this kind of thing. So this is the new monster. This is the new boogeyman, right? Is this sort of windmills. We're chasing windmills, right? The windmills are a delusion, if nothing less. So my picture wasn't as good as yours, but anyway. So there are different ways to study the current predicament that we're in. Of course, Durkheim's totemic principle is one way. Anybody know the totemic principle? No Durkheim scholars out there? The god of the clan is the clan itself. The problem is not the current emperor with no clothes on in the White House that represents the fascist state, right? The corporate interest. It is the collective psychology or pathology of our situation, right? That's the sort of twist that you might see from the Frankfurt School with Erich Fromm, who obviously utilized Marx to analyze Freud and Freud to analyze Marx. Sometimes we have to flip what we naturally are sort of moved towards to study. We sometimes have to flip the question, right? So the Frankfurt School can give us a lot of insight, as well as Durkheim, that maybe we need to think about the question in different ways. And I would advocate the study of fascism has very little to do with the sort of bells and whistles and smoke, that we see coming out. They want the distraction. The fascists want the distractions, right? They like it because they can get what they need done while everyone pays attention to the bells and whistles. I would also argue, as a evolutionary and cognitive anthropologist, the cognitive science of religion is a very positivist, a very important move in our field that allows us to look at methods that we might not have previously had. And I do mean methods, right? That's something that I've spent the last 10 years of working on, that we can learn a lot from the study of methods, okay? And then I would ask the question, if religion is natural, and this comes from the sort of evolutionary psychology, what is it about fascism that people are so attracted to, right? Is it natural? Is there something about fascism that we have evolved to have a bias towards? Because we see so many people attract to it and have cognitive dissonance about things that they would normally never do. I mean, if we look at the current state of the hearings that are going on right now, the people that think it's a witch hunt and that think it's all these kinds of things, right? They are in complete denial of many of the values that they hold. I mean, the Republican Party, for better or worse, used to be the party of the moral high ground. At least that's, the stated, explicit sort of reasoning. It's all out the window. All you have to do is look at Lindsey Graham talking about Bill Clinton during his impeachment, about the things that were sacred and Constitution. And it's funny, the founding fathers, including Benjamin Franklin, were very aware of these things happening at some point, and they wrote these particular protections. But yet, people want to throw them out. I also do think the associative wealth hypothesis, people like being with other people that are successful, or they perceive are successful or wealthy. I relish the day the taxes will be released, that we will see that the emperor has no money in the vault. It's just like Game of Thrones. I'm the richest man in all the city, and when you open the vault, there's nothing in there. But the vault made everyone perceive that. And I think, last case scenario, the responsibility of intellectualism. We have a responsibility because we have given the right, the fascist on the right, the vocabulary that they have used to make this happen. We can't just do critical theory without responsibility. Right? There is a responsibility as an intellectual. We can't just let these people go out who are woke and become pundits on these television shows and say, I represent the illiberal elite. I am explaining fascism to all of you who are wrong, this kind of thing. Because it is where Steve Bannon and many of these people on the right have gotten their ideas from. It's postmodernism. It's cultural relativism. It's hermeneutics. These are all things that the Frankfurt School was interested in. So it's people like Rudy Siebert who actually care about their students, who have really tried to train these people with responsibility. And I think that's something we should take away. Sorry, I don't mean to preach. And since I don't have a minute, 2 minutes. Department of Comparative Religion and History. My history, 1996. I came here, thought I knew it all. Quickly I learned that wasn't the case. Though it did take a little bit of extra time to figure that out. I was very fortunate. I studied, I was a research assistant with Byron Earhart. and we were working on a book together. I fell in love with the department. I think that has produced many, many great things, including students. I can count on my hand at least 12 books that have been published by students of this department. Many people have gone on to do their own thing, whether it's in academia or whether it's something else. I would advocate that, and I'd be willing to write a letter to our friend that was here earlier, that a hire should be made to replace Rudy with someone that's in theory and method so that this department can keep a strong focus on that particular sort of pathway, right? I know you're trying to get the real meat and potatoes, but the idea is that this department is really built on the idea. It was different. It was different from Harvard. It was different from Chicago. It was different from all these places. That it provided the only place in America at the time where you could study theory and method at a very high level. There are other people that are trying to copy it now. I know Russ McCutcheons is trying to do theory and method at Alabama. He has a master's program. But this was the spot, man. This was the spot. So, if anything else, I want to thank you all. I'm very happy that I was able to come and speak for Rudy's sort of retirement, which I still don't believe in. And that I hope that all of you do well, and I enjoyed all the presentations, and I think that we have something proud to be that we all were brought together, and that we are coming back together now to speak on behalf of Rudy's work as a scholar and a gentleman.
We've set aside some time for discussion, but before that, there's somebody in the room who would all like to probably hear a couple of words from. And maybe, should we all just, do you want to stay there and we all just turn and face? Maybe that might be easier.
Good idea. Okay, I just would like to say a few words of gratitude for this beautiful event today. And I would like to thank, first of all, for that you were coming to our excellent conference on the critical theory and the study of religion. Some of you came from very far away. I'm very grateful to Provost Dr. Jennifer Byrd for her welcome address to our conference this morning. And I thank the chair of the Comparative Religion Department, Professor Steve COVELL, and Professor Dustin Byrd for organizing this conference so beautifully. I thank all those who have contributed excellent papers to the conference this morning, which threw light on the work which we have done or tried to do here. The Professor Emeritus Michael Ott, my good old friend, and Professor Dustin Byrd, Professor Nicolas Budimir, and Dr. Toby Johnson, and Professor Lee McCorkle, whose accent always makes me very happy. Because I have one myself. I hope very much that we can publish these wonderful papers, and we try to find some way to do that in the new publishing house of Dr. Byrd. I'm overall most grateful that I was allowed to teach and to research and to publish for over half a century at our great Western Michigan University. I thank 9 presidents. I think I counted them right. I thank 9 presidents and even more provosts and vice presidents for academic affairs, and many colleagues and even more students for our most fruitful cooperation in Kalamazoo, in Dubrovnik, and in Yalta, and in Canada, in the German Federal Republic, and even in the former German Democratic Republic. I am most grateful to all those scholars who helped me consciously or unconsciously through many years to develop and to practice our critical theory of religion and society. I hope very much that we find generous donors who will make possible a chair and humanistic research center for the critical theory at Western Michigan University, which will develop further the critical theory and keep alive the critical spirit which it contains into the future. Please let me conclude my short remarks, unusual for me, with a short birthday letter by a great German Swiss scholar, a student of Jürgen Habermas, who wanted to be here today, but was not able to fly any longer. Professor Emeritus Edmund Ahrens from the University of Lucerne in Switzerland. So it is a birthday letter which sums up very nicely what we try to do and what was being pointed out this morning. Now it is in German, and I would like to read it in German because it is such a classical German he speaks. But at the beginning of our republic, we had a vote on which language was to be spoken in this country, and by one vote we decided it would be English. So English it will be. I will translate it as good as I can, but the original is better than my translation. Dear Rudy, I sent to you on your today's 92nd birthday, that was just a few weeks ago, my cordial congratulations and best wishes. You have, after your legendary 54 years at the Western Michigan University, taken early emeritation. According to the early there, of course, that's a little bit exaggerated. According to the, at this occasion, appearing wonderful and marvelous portrait in the Western Michigan University Alumni Periodical and the approaching conference, that's us today, in your honor, good reason to look back on your achievements with pride and in dignity and satisfaction. Now you have managed under, at times, very difficult circumstances to let your large family grow up and hold together. You have mediated to generations of students the critical theory of the Frankfurt School, with which you have been connected as long as few others, likewise engaged as well as differentiated, and you have created an impressive and internationally recognized, even in particular in India, known and received scientific work. In the United States, there is probably nobody who over decades was so intensively and consequentially and steadfastly and unwaveringly devoted as you to the heritage of the Frankfurt School, and who has represented globally the remaining and sometimes virtually alarming and frightening actuality of the thinkers of the dialectic of enlightenment. Adorno's recently out of the estate published Vienna lecture of 1967, the Frankfurt School was the only one which predicted since the early 60s Trumpism. The recently out of the estate published Vienna lecture of 1967 about aspects of the new right-wing radicalism of which we heard today. There he speaks after all. This speaks after all volumes. That is valid not only in relation to the AfD in Germany and the FPÖ in Austria, two fascist organizations, but also for Trump. Your communicative and organizational abilities fall in no way behind your scientific achievements. That is witnessed, for instance, by more than 40 years engagement at the IUC, in the University Center in Dubrovnik. Here you managed to bring together, to inspire, and to move forward many female and male friends from all parts of the world, in Dubrovnik, in Yalta, Kalamazoo, and at many other locations. Dear Rudy, for your birthday, I wish you every conceivable good. I thank you for many stimulations and suggestions and impulses, which also I have always again experienced in our unforgettable meetings. I thank you for your 40-year friendship, and I wish you, in the circle of your family, joy, health, happiness, and God's blessing. I add a small text which will soon appear in the Italian periodical Topologic in an issue which is devoted to the memory and remembrance of Karl Otto Appel. Best wishes, your Edmund. This is what is concluding my gratitude, expression of gratitude to all of you, to my family and to my friends. This was a wonderful event today, and I thank you all for making it possible. Thank you.
It's going to be kind of hard to follow that up. But, we do have about 30 minutes open for discussion, so I'd like to open the floor to anybody that has comments or questions directed at the speakers or just in general. Of course, we have Dr. Siebert with us as well, so open the floor to questions, comments. Yeah.
I'm good to go. So this is directed at the conspiracy theory. So what's the
Conspiracy theorist, it's Nicholas.
is there a fundamental difference between a conspiracy theory and just a regular theory? And by making that distinction, what's gained in terms of like acquiring knowledge or physical?
Good question. I mean, I think most of it's a lame answer, like Karl Popper's falsifiability, just the way that many of and even the term conspiracy theory is a little inadequate. If we have time, conspiratorial thinking is a little better, because it's just like these little circles of self-referential thinking. We could even think of the Bible. Why is the Bible the inspired? Because the Bible says it's inspired. It's, what is that, circular logic. So, with Marx, with Weber, with Durkheim, you can see, even though they're broad umbrella meta-theories, there's things that you could falsify about them. Chemtrails, if you deny chemtrails, you're being affected by the chemtrails or you're in on it. So I think all of that, especially that kernel of if you deny it, you're in on it, that distinguishes conspiratorial thinking or the conspiratorial worldview from theories, but there's at least overlap.
It's always good to have a current graduate student to start off the question.
I guess something I've wrangled with for 19 years now. And Dr. Siebert, Dr. Ott, Dustin, I'll turn to you all for help on this. Yeah. 19 years wrangling with it. Does critical theory work outside of a European context? I guess as an Asianist, my interests lie elsewhere, and I see parallels, and I wrote the note that, during Dr. Ott's talk, Guru Nanak was a critical theorist, in that social concern and such, but so much of it is rooted in a discussion of critical theory as a European and Western phenomenon. Can there be an attempt to discuss it within other cultural settings, and will it work?
Well, I think the very issue of critical theory, the Frankfurt School is, as we've heard, negation. That's the focus. Negation of what? Absolute negation of things? No. Determinate negation. Determinate negation means there are things that are present that not only don't meet our values, our ideals, but also are causing human suffering. And that human suffering is not European, it's not American, it's not regional. It is part of our nature. It's part of being human. So, critical theory of society, critical theory of religion, addresses the very nature of our humanity and the causes for our happiness, but also for our suffering. That's the focus. That's where and that's the negative theology or even the negative philosophy, that the critical theory of the first generation, second generation, and on, not so much now, I don't think, but it's the negation of the negation in Hegelian terms. Now, people on the right would say, well, the negation that has to happen, and the negative, or the alt-right particularly, is this ethno invasion, these immigrants. And you have to understand this possibly from, the negation possibly from a European perspective of cultural ideals. But that's going back to Plato, that's going back to Confucius, that's going back to the foundations of the axial age of religious development. That's global. Those ideals of what it means to be human. That's where we have to get into the discussion. We have to talk to each other. That's discourse. And there's no right, this is it. That would be a fascist determination, authoritarian. We talk to each other and try to break down the walls that we built up to protect ourselves against each other so that we can maybe get in touch with our own humanity, which is common, and see the suffering, the joys, the hopes, failures, all that kind of thing, of which we share, and also then do something about those conditions that are hurting people.
This isn't a new concern, I think, with critical theory that isolates it among the European ethnosphere, if you will. When I first submitted my book, Islam in a Post-Secular Society, Religion, Secularity, and Antagonism, Recalcitrant Faith, which is an attempt to use critical theory to understand the Muslims, the Muslim world, and the problems of Muslims being in a secular society, the reviewers sent back to me in unison, critical theory has nothing to say about the non-Western world, and therefore this book shouldn't be published. I said, seriously, I just gave you 350 pages of how it has something to say about the non-Western world. But they didn't want to publish it because of that. And so it's not new. I mean, it was eventually published with the same publishing house but a different series of books. A little bit more of an enlightened editor on that one. But when I came to Western and started studying critical theory, I did that in tandem with studying Islam, as you know. In working on my master's thesis, what I found was, especially in the 20th century, like say the mid-20th century, 1960s, was that Islamic intellectuals were already engaged with critical theory. That they had already learned from critical theory. In fact, they had already learned from the critical theory of religion, and more specifically. So I'm thinking someone like Ali Shariati in Iran, who was instrumental in articulating and constructing the language, the arguments for the bringing down of the Shah. It was all in critical theory terms. He had learned from Marcuse, and he had learned from Adorno and Horkheimer and Habermas. Now that was a critique for some of his more traditional conservative mullahs, and Ayatollahs in Iran, including the Ayatollah Khomeini, the critique of him that he was too dependent on the West for his critique of the Shah. But nevertheless, he was able to translate what was deeply Western into language, into Islamic language that then saturated the Iranian people. So they didn't see it as they were reading Marx and Hegel and Kant. They were reading Muslim theology. They were reading Islamic ethics. But he got it from the critical theorists. So it certainly can, go outside the bounds of the West.
I would agree. As a sociologist, as long as we're exporting capitalism, critical theory is relevant, because if we're going to commodify everything and make, cash nexus the center of our universe, then it will always be relevant.
Let me just, thanks, Walter. But I want to jump on my two great buddies, Dustin and Michael. That it annoys me that on some levels we fail to make a extra scholastic connection outside of our jargon. Because I teach a lot of classes in race and ethnicity, and I'm very unsatisfied with this thing called critical race theory, which has very little to do with critical theory, alienation, Dialektik der Aufklärung, anything like that, these great concepts that should be imported into our studies of race, ethnicity, and immigration. And the only place I see historically that happened was that Angela Davis studied with Herbert Marcuse. And so she's a genius. She connected with the Black liberation struggle. But outside of that, I don't see these ideas, at least in the academy, being connected, and I don't see the activism connecting to Black liberation struggle, or brown liberation struggle, red liberation struggles, all of the national liberation struggles. That's always frustrated me, because I don't want to brag like I'm part of, but I sort of kind of get my toe dirty in that, and that just always frustrates me. Is maybe you call me a Maoist, but you got to connect to the masses too, and the masses, they kind of don't get the jargon.
This came
So
up
it pisses me off.
in a conference I was in New York at the Telos conference last February, and it's the same type of critique. It was from a prophetic black minister. And he said that same thing. He said, where the hell were the Frankfurt Schoolers in the 50s and 60s when we were fighting in the streets? Like, were they just sitting in the ivory towers in Colombia and then in California? And it's kind of true to a certain extent. In terms of praxis, they were. I mean, Marcuse was a little bit more active than, say, Adorno and Horkheimer. But one thing that we tend to forget is they were always under suspicion in the U.S. as being communists and being prepared to be deported. And they all have FBI files, despite the fact that Marcuse worked for the OSS, the forerunner to the CIA. But they were always on edge of that if they became too understandable to the masses, right? That would lead to some very bad things for them. That sounds like a Trump thing, a very, very bad thing. You know what I mean? Marcuse didn't care, right? And thus he got into all those fights with Reagan. In California. But that certainly is an issue, right? I mean, so how do you translate this, obviously, this theory that is steeped in sociology and in history and psychology and philosophy, how do you translate it into the language of the masses? That is a difficult task. And so someone like Angela Davis could do it, but Adorno could not, right? And that may be the task of the third and fourth generation of critical theorists, right? To somehow to stop the praxis castration, let's say, right, of critical theory and bring it into, praxis Viagra.
Let me get Santiago in there.
Before I ask my questions, I'd like to comment on what was just asked about whether there's room for critical theory outside Europe and North America. And I'd just like to suggest some bibliography. There's a Trinidadian historian who was asked by Horkheimer and Adorno to go from Harlem to Columbia University to talk with these two Germans. His name was C.L.R. James. And in investigating C.L.R.'s files at UCLA, his archive is there. There's a note that C.L.R. wrote to himself about Horkheimer and Adorno, said these two Germans don't understand very much about politics. And what C.L.R. meant by politics is negating the existing state, negating the existing society. And that's something that people in Asia, in Africa, and Latin America have continued to pursue against the European Union and against the American Empire. And I'd just like to provide you with a bit of bibliography. An economist in Africa who was banned from his country, Samir Amin, lived most of his life in exile in France and in Dakar. A man from Sri Lanka who published Race and Class in London named A.C. Vanandan. a journal where I published that you can get here in the Waldo Library. Walter Rodney, who was CLR's disciple, who also made this connection between racialized exploitation and the way it's represented and interpreted in keeping with Benjamin's teachings. And a man from Spain in Colombia named Jesus Martin Barbero, who was the one that introduced us to these ideas in Latin America. But to put it in religious terms, in addition to Shariati that was mentioned earlier by Dustin, there is a priest, a Colombian priest who studied in Belgium named Camilo Torres, who was not only the chaplain at the National University in Colombia, but he was also the chaplain of the Army of National Liberation, which is still fighting against the American occupation in Colombia. That, with regards to your questions, if you need the bibliography, I'll be happy to help you out after we're through here today. With regards to my questions, before I ask them, I'd like to say this. This is only the second time in the history of this institution that an academic symposium has been held to celebrate the retirement of a professor. And as I was telling the director of the religion department, I'd like to thank all of you, especially those of you who appreciate the difference between being a university professor and being an intellectual. I think there's a chasm of distance between those two categories of people who are just journeymen and women as instructors. That said, let me ask my two questions. I have one question for Dustin and another one for Lee. Critical theory isn't very good about explaining the racialization of exploitation. You have to go to people like Siebert Robinson, who does that in Black Marxism. How do you negate the existing economic, cultural, military regime in keeping with this notion of dialectics? Given that in the next 10 or 15 years, African Americans and Latinos are going to be the demographic majority in the United States, English is going to be a minority language in the United States, and the American empire is going to run out of petroleum, which means that your armies are going to be worthless in terms of imposing the global agenda on the rest of the world. What does negation look like in that context? That's my question for Dustin, and my question for Lee is this. This way theory and method is understood within the confines of a declining empire is very different than the way theory and method are understood in Africa, in Asia, and Latin America. So how do you distinguish between theories that within the United States discussions have to do like with the last 6 inches of the small intestine versus theory as it's understood everywhere else, which is positivism, functionalism, structuralism, Marxism, dependency theory in some cases, and feminist theory in others? How do you translate the American parochial and provincial understanding of theory so that you can facilitate dialogue with all these other places that are actively attempting to also negate the logic of the American empire? I hope I haven't caused you to lose a lot of sleep.
As a 2-year-old, that's what causes me to lose sleep. And something that happened in November 3 years ago, that causes a lot of sleep. The question is really interesting. I mean, what's the future of the U.S. in terms of its power, its influence, its role in the world? What does it look like to negate that? That's a very difficult question to answer, even though critical theory in many ways is an attempt to read the trends of the future. I'm right now in the process of writing a book on alternative forms of fascism, just called alt-fascism. And one of the things that, one of the primary sources of their theories are the declinist theorists, like Oswald Spengler, who's been brought back to life and given I think it's probably the 3rd or 4th life that he has. In reading Spengler's Decline of the West, it becomes very clear, even though he wasn't a very precise thinker, that a lot of the trends that he identified at the beginning of the 20th century are only really taking off at the beginning of the 21st century. So right now, the U.S., as part of the West, is part of the forefront of history, and the Russians are re-emerging as the other power within the forefront of history. But we also are in a massive decline to a certain extent. In what was spoken about that some of what Dr. McCorkle talked about, that somehow the right has learned from the Frankfurt School. That is what I've learned very concretely by studying this new right movement and the alt-right as it's called here. They have learned the Frankfurt School very well. They know them. They quote them. Mainly in the context of the West, though. So not so much in the context of the rest of the world, other than the fact that the rest of the world is coming to the West. But the diagnosis might be very similar with the Frankfurt School and the New Right. The prognosis is very different. How they respond to the decline is to engage in a reverse dialectics, right? So that which was already negated should be brought back and preserved. So the negation itself has to be negated in the opposite direction, right? So the only way to save the West is to return to the ethno-state, to return to the Volksgemeinschaft, if you will, the people's community, where the states in themselves are based on, predicated on, determined by the ethnosphere, right? By what Habermas calls pre-political foundations. So that's by race, that by tradition, by culture, by a very specific language. Now, what the Frankfurt School says, how to counteract that, I mean, they fight with that all the time. That's the metapolitical argument that's going on right now in philosophical world, especially in political philosophy. But what is the alternative that the Frankfurt School presents in light of that? Nothing. That's the problem. There is no, in any way, shape, or form, this goes back to part of the apophatic, the negative nature of critical theory, there's no positive vision for what the West ought to be post-collapse, outside of, well, let's tame some of the excesses and make it a little bit more tolerable. That's more associated with Habermas' line of thinking. The more critical, or the more radical critical theorists remain almost entirely negative. And so they're not really putting forth any type of vision that counters the far right, or the neo-fascists, if you will. And that's part of the book I'm writing right now, is just saying, to rethink that. Is it now the time for the Frankfurt School to, in some ways, posit some kind of alternative to neoliberalism, and the alternative to neoliberalism, which is the return to almost like a fascist state as a way of dealing with the decline of the neoliberal West. So to answer the question is to be very pessimistic. There isn't anything right now. Nothing.
Not in the West.
Not in the West, exactly. Not in the West.
That's why I suggested that you didn't see what I'm done. And Samir Amin, because they say that insofar as exploitation and super exploitation has moved to Asia, Africa, and Latin America, the explanations and the strategies are going to come from there.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. And you know, it's interesting, Habermas actually makes that argument at one point in time. He doesn't flesh it out very well, but he makes the argument that the West has to learn from these new Westerners, if you will. The people coming from Asia, the people coming from Africa, coming from the Middle East, who still have the resources, especially within religion, that can offer some sort of alternative vision for the world as it ought to be, because they've just exhausted them in the West, and all that's left is bad neoliberalism or the bad reaction to neoliberalism.
Dustin, Lenin said the same thing 80 years before Habermas.
Yes, he did.
The revolutions in the East.
Yep. Yes, he did.
And there's a danger of positing something positive.
And yeah, right, exactly. That's why they haven't done it for so long.
Well, but yeah, inherently, the positive is in the negative. And that's what has to be looked out. So I hesitate to go maybe as far as what you said, that there's nothing positive oriented within the critical theory. or in its determinate negation process. It's there, but it's calling us, first of all, to get an idea of what's causing the hell that we're in, so that we can then, and this goes to Habermas, but it's also there in Adorno and in Benjamin and in Horkheimer, Marcuse as well. It's then that we sit down and start constructing. We start to create out of the determinate negation of what's going on. How can we do this better? I mean, the positive ideas are not utopian, because utopian thought often becomes reified, frozen as there it is, and oftentimes that's exactly what has happened in critical
It becomes
theory.
a source of domination.
Exactly. The critical theory gets pigeonholed. The critical theory is not a dynamic, living expression. It becomes a thing that we study. This is what we do. And thus we make it into an academic setting. Of course, it's in academics, but it's also in the villages. It's in the rural settings. It's in the urban slums. It's everywhere. Wherever there is human suffering taking place, unless we have become so dehumanized, desensitized, wherever that dehumanization is taking place, the task of our humanity should be rationally, not just religiously, but rationally, the negation of those conditions. And it's in there, then, that, not some grand image of what life could be, but it's in the negation of what's going on, that the real creative acts of critical thinking, whether it's theological or reason, what can take place. But that's one of the things that this system has been very, very good. The positivist system, the capitalist system, has been very, very good in taking away our trust with each other to even sit down and talk, and to think with each other, and to be with each other, or care about each other. I don't give a damn about any of you. That's the idea. That's what we've been taught. Why? Because I have to defend myself. There isn't a religion, one of the world religions, that has that. Reason, the ideals of reason, don't speak that way. The categorical imperative, really as concept, the categorical imperative is the translation into secular forms of the golden rule. Love your neighbor, and Horkheimer said this from a graduate student, that it doesn't say, love your neighbor as yourself. No, that's not what it meant. Love your neighbor because your neighbor is you. That's the relational aspect. It's not base bourgeois on, I wouldn't want that happening to me. No, it's how do we act together. That's where the positive can be created. It's not out there to grab. And every positive that is out there, utopian or whatever it is, alt-right, whatever those images are, need to be put on the table and we talk together discursively. Together. With equal rights, all of the issues that Habermas has identified in this paper. So I would just hedge a little bit on that the positive is in the negative and we have to see it through.
Right, and what I mean by, 2 seconds, what I mean by that with the negation is also the preservation of that which we've already negated, right? So this idea of Willensgemeinschaft, right, of people's community. You know, one of the constant gripes I have in universities and colleges, we talk about diversity. Seriously, that's an issue. That's a big problem, that we talk about diversity incessantly. We never talk about unity. What makes us one despite all the diversity, right? And so, because we always focus on the diversity, we never talk about the unity. But the unity idea is already foundational, at least for this country, right? It's the e pluribus unum. The unum is the important part, right? Ultimately, because that's the telos. But, and so when I say about, you know, the negation and try to put something positive, something that we've already have, that we somehow forgot.
Rudy. And then actually we'll wrap up with Rudy's comments, and I'll make a couple comments after that. But Rudy.
We must admit, of course, that the critical theory is a Western product. So it is rooted in Jerusalem, it is rooted in Athens, and it's rooted in Rome, and it's rooted in the Enlightenment city in Paris. So, but, for instance, 10 of our books are printed in India. And as Arends, my friend, says, it has people discuss it in India and obviously understand it. And this Indian movement is connected with Russia. So in Leningrad, not Leningrad, Petersburg, they do discuss it. So I think it can step over the borders, intellectual borders. Today, the whole thing falls, as we saw today, into two camps, the communitarians and the cosmopolitans. And both sides have to be taken seriously, because that unum there, that may play a role also among the communitarians. And Trump is a communitarian, the wall builders. And that has to be taken seriously. There is something in people which responds to that. There is no question. When we talk about dialectics, there is this negative, and maybe some of you are disturbed about it if one is not used to this type of thinking. But when I was in the hospital last week, I came in and there was a woman laying on the floor in front of the hospital. She was totally covered, but her hand looked out, and she was an African American. And she had her little walker beside her, with all her property, private property on it. And we passed by and we had health insurance. She had no health insurance. So one person after person went to the hospital and she was just lying there in this cold weather. It was maybe an hour, and I don't know if somebody came and picked her up. I don't know what the past and the future was. That is the negative. This negative, when it accumulates, then pushes the system beyond itself. It is not just a subjective wishing or whatever. So it went with Rome, according to Gibbon and so on. So it pushes beyond itself. Nobody, no matter what anybody wants, what the workers want, or if they know something about it, or what the capitalists want, and so on, the accumulation of the negative, which cannot be mitigated anymore at a certain point, is the tremendous dynamic which pushes into a new postmodern system, which then determinedly negates the system which we are in now. Determinedly negate means that some of it, what we have now, is good and should be preserved. The Jewish system, for instance, is a bourgeois Christian invention. So the students of the 60s made the mistake very often, and even Lenin or so, that they too abstractly, they negated the past system too abstractly and did not appreciate sufficiently the positive things which this past system had. And so these names of socialism and capitalism, if one would have a simple definition that capitalism is the private appropriation of collective labor, which is a contradiction, and that socialism is the collective appropriation of collective labor, that those who produce the surplus labor are appropriating it in whatever form, self-management system or whatever. There are innumerable ways to do that. But if we would hold on to those two definitions and not think that socialism is to have a minimum wage or whatever. So that is what the struggle is about, also between those communitarians and those cosmopolitans. Those who want to build the walls and those who follow the Good Samaritan and take the walls, the in-group, out-group walls down. These are the two directions, but both of them have to be taken very seriously.